Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my new podcast, Cult Conversations, the Influence Continuum with Steve Hassan. And I have with me an extraordinary woman, scholar, professor, former member who I've been wanting to interview for a really long time, and we finally made it happen. And I want to start by holding up a book that I think if you're an ex-member, you need to read this book. It's called Make It Meaningful: How to Find Purpose in Life and Work by my guest, Dr. Debbie Haski-Leventhal. And I listened to it on Audible, and I'm like, I need to read this in print. So there's very few books that I do a twofer, and yours was one of it. I was that moved. And I remember when I got deprogrammed in 1976, I didn't know who I was, what to believe. I was angry at God for doing this to me and just so confused. And I had to reinvent myself. But I had 19 years to go back to with family and friends to remind me what my life was. And you were raised in the Cabala Center of the Bergs, most famously Madonna's cult. And it really is a mind control cult. I've been helping people exit it for decades now. And typically they read Combating Cult Mind Control, and then they just want to talk with me and tell me their story about how their marriage was broken up because their partner didn't like it. And the Kabbalah Center said, oh, we'll find you your real soulmate. Or how they were ripped off to pay money for a Torah or Zohars that they couldn't read. But we'll get into that. But just for the heck of it, you sent me a cute bio intro, and I want to read it just so people get a flavor for you. And I should also say I have a copy of a BBC documentary that came out in 2005 that you were in with your father, and your father and mother, your family, were the earliest followers of the Bergs before they became a multi-million-dollar horror show. They were a small little cult. Anyway, so here's what you sent me. If a fortune teller told 19-year-old Debbie that she'd one day become a professor of purpose and impact, she'd have asked for a refund. That's funny. A tragedy led her family to the Cabala Center years before Madonna and other celebrities joined it, where she grew up in a cult-like atmosphere until she managed to escape the threat of an arranged marriage. Higher education and volunteering transformed Debbie's life, and she has since devoted her entire career to studying the pro-social behavior of individuals and companies. Today, Debbie is an awarded and well-published professor of business manager at Macquarie University. Did I pronounce it right?
Macquarie, yeah.
Macquarie University, Australia, with over 60 academic articles, 5 books, and a TED Talk, which I saw and I love too. She dedicates her teaching, research, and knowledge to creating impact and enabling others to find meaningfulness and purpose. And then the Make It Meaningful was published by Simon & Schuster in Australia. Really, people, you'll thank me for reading this story. It was so honest and so, gritty. So with that, Debbie, it's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Wow, thank you so much for this amazing introduction.
I am a fan. I'm just like, you have a formula to help people figure out how to have meaning and purpose. And in this chaotic horror show of a world that we're living in with this nightmare of politically happening around the world, we need people to understand life is precious, and it's up to us to really tune in to what works for us and to really go for it.
And I wish someone showed it to me when I was 19, because my biggest fear at 19 was that my life is going to be meaningless. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, and I remember, I don't know if it was in your book or what, but I remember when you left the Kabbalah Center, you were one of the elite Hevra, one of
Yeah,
the slaves, one of the
yeah,
traffic victims, and you and your sister reminded you that you were suicidal, and you had completely forgotten
yes.
how horrible you were when you first got out of this cult.
I say that leaving the cult was as liberating as jumping off an airplane without a parachute.
That's so funny. My metaphor was I felt like I fell off a skyscraper
There
but
you
never
go.
hit bottom. That was what it's like. I was part of the chosen elite and now I'm not there and I haven't landed. I don't know who I am and what the hell's going
The
on.
Kabbalah Center gave me the ground I was walking on, and all of a sudden it was gone. And I felt like a little cartoon walking on thin air and just like afraid I'm going to fall any second. But I didn't fall. I was okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, when I was writing the book and I spoke to my sister about how it opens, and she asked, did you mention that you tried to commit suicide the night you left the Kabbalah Center? I forgot all about it. I forgot a lot of things that happened in the months before I left the Kabbalah Center. It really was a horror show.
Yeah. So let's go back, tell briefly, because we want people to read the book.
Yeah.
Briefly, you had a tragedy with your sibling. So why don't you tell the what was the situational vulnerability that got your parents in it? And
Yeah. So I say that I was born into unhappiness. As I was born in the 1970s in Tel Aviv. Just before I was born, my brother, who was just 6, he was diagnosed with cancer. And of course, it's the worst nightmare of any parent. So I grew up into this tragedy and sorrow. I actually had to be raised by my grandmother mostly because my parents were with my brother in the hospital most of the time. And then, very sadly, when I was 3 and he was not even 10, he passed away. So my first childhood memories are of my mother sitting on the floor crying for her lost son.
mm,
Like many others, this tragedy just consumed it's not just the happiness in our house, but the air. There was like no air to breathe. Tragedy was everything. And these are the only memories I had before joining the cult when I'm 5. So 2 years of asking the hard questions. My mother asked, why did it happen to me? What did I do to deserve it? What can I learn from it? And so when she stumbled upon the Kabbalah Center 2 years later, the Bergs kind of gave her the answers that she was looking for and a sense of meaning that she was lacking. And that was the key to getting her to join the early days of the cult. And
yes.
then
Okay. If
because
I
of
can
that, we all
so if I can interrupt and say it's a pattern across many
Mm,
cults that when there's a tragedy or something, it happened for a reason, so you could join the cult.
exactly.
It
So
was,
they,
yes, there's
the
meaning to
last
his death.
birds told my mother that my brother passed away at the age of 10 so that they can join the Kabbalah Center and spread the light. And
Yeah.
somehow my mother, who was desperate, she bought it. And not only did she buy it, she made all of us buy this narrative. So we became some of the first members of the Kabbalah Center when it was just a small organization in some basement in Tel Aviv, and it was not rich at all, no wealth. And so she thought she found the light.
Yeah, light is a loaded term.
Oh, yeah.
Every cult has them. And what's tricky about this cult is they say they're not a religion because they want to recruit Christians and because Orthodox Jews refute it completely, how they teach it. But they reframe it as spirituality and light, right?
That's
So
exactly right. And we were always hearing that when I was growing up in the cult, even though the Berg, who came up from a very ultra Orthodox religious background, he used to include a lot of very religious ceremonies and rituals. And we were, in fact, in some points more extreme than the ultra-Orthodox. And we had to dress accordingly. We went to ultra-Orthodox school. So much for not being a religion. I grew up very, very religious.
Well, it was early days before they realized they can make a lot more money marketing to Christians. Yeah.
Back then, when I was a member, it was mostly Jewish. But then, when they discovered that there is a lot of money outside the Jewish community, it became more inclusive for a reason.
Yeah. And unfortunately, so many people have had bad experiences with this cult that they have a bad taste to Judaism because they felt ripped off.
Yes.
And high pressure sales and other things like that. So what else should we say that's of note? I want to say that I saw your father in the BBC documentary. He and your mom kind of realized that the Bergs had just become corrupted by their power, by their money. They had no time for them anymore, even though they were like devoted followers for so many years, bringing money, recruiting people. They just discarded your parents.
So the Cabala Center had the playbook of how to control people. I was born with the name Adi. When I was 7, the Berg said I needed a new name. There is this controlling people via changing their names is not
very important.
Yeah, and so I was one of the first people in the Kabbalah Center to get a name change. And later it became like a common thing that every new member got a new name. Even Madonna became Esther. But it was one of these things. And there were so many other ways in which we were controlled, abused, stripped away from any previous identity that we had, having to go some crazy rituals. So imagine a 9-year-old girl, and we go together to these trips where we visit the graves of some holy people, and then we go to the Sea of Galilee, and we are 100 women diving naked into the Sea of Galilee. It was traumatizing. Really was. And so, but there were all these things that are around nudity, which is again a very common theme. Because when you're stripped off your clothes, you're stripped off your identity and you become part of the bigger one. And that's what they wanted the whole time, that we become the collective and not the individuals, because individuals think.
Yes.
Individuals might criticize. Whereas when you're part of a collective, you just obey.
Right.
And they wanted us to just obey. And later they started realizing, so the Bergs, or I find it hard to call him the rabbi because he was not even a rabbi.
Yeah, don't. but I can always tell former members who haven't been counseled, call him the Rav.
Yes.
The Rav and Karen.
That's how we refer to him. So it was hard for me to get away from that. But he was not a Rav. He was not a rabbi. He was never certified. He even called himself a doctor. He never had a PhD. Now that I have a PhD, I know how hard, and you do too, how hard you work to get a PhD. Yet somehow he managed to add that to his name.
Well, he lied.
Rabbi Dr. Philip Berg. So let's just call him Philip Berg.
Yeah.
And so Philip Berg started writing some books. Reading them today, they're not good. And
they're ghostwritten. They didn't even write them.
He didn't.
No.
But he realized he could sell these. And what a better way, cost-effective way to sell them than to get enslaved people to do it for free. And so this was coined when I was about 12. The guys, the chevre, was first the 7 guys. It was really 7 men who came with them to the US, and they became the first chevre, the first guys. And they were going around selling books. And later it became an army of hundreds and thousands of people going around selling the books. And there was a lot of unethical behavior. We stopped at nothing because we were on a mission from God.
Ends justify the means, right?
Exactly. So I
the
share
evil Satan outside the world.
So if you have any doubts that what you're doing is right, they tell you this is the devil speaking. So if you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be selling the books to someone who can't afford food, no, this is the devil speaking. So whatever doesn't work according to their agenda was the devil speaking. They called it the other side, the sitra achra. And it just, whatever served their agenda was the right thing to do. So I share in the book a story that I remembered only when I was writing the book. And that was me walking into an apartment building with my fellow chevre, Rivka. Of course, she was not born Rivka. They changed her name. And so we walk into an apartment and everything is black, Stephen. The whole apartment was burned. And I remember the microwave being all melted. And we walk into this apartment and there is a woman sitting in the midst of this blackness. And she said, my apartment just got burned last night. I lost everything. And I just want to say, I'm sorry and leave. But Rivka said, there is no coincidence, which was, one of the playbook sentences we used. We're here for a reason. We were sent to you because now it's the time for you to protect yourself and buy those books so you will be protected. And she was crying and she said, I have nothing. And yet Rivka managed to somehow sell her something. And it was daunting. And so there were so many unethical things that I've seen, but you turn a blind eye because you can't imagine doing anything else. And you need that for your survival. So you just agree with whatever happens. And you see unethical behavior and you see the Zohars being sold to people with cancers and all this rubbish
and
with
the
the
Kabbalah
holy
water that comes from an unclean plant in Canada. But they'll get you don't have heart surgery. Drink the Kabbalah water or the Pinchas water.
Or rub the water on your belly or on your heart.
Yeah.
And it's just filtered water from Canada.
Yeah.
But we were told that everything was holy because the Bergs and his sons, they were blessing it. And that was a lot of rubbish. And I remember thinking, the Zohar is being printed in Israel. How are they blessing it? They're not even here.
Right.
But you have these doubts. Then you tell yourself, no, it's the devil speaking. I should not think that way. And therefore you just comply with whatever crazy rituals and agenda they sell you.
Yep, and members are taught thought-stopping techniques. The one that comes to mind is let's see if I get this right. One soul with the Rav and Karen at the Beit HaMikdash for Yerushalayim. Does that sound familiar? Did
it's
you do
a newer
that?
thing. It was after I left. They really
escalated.
Their technique. So there were a lot of things that I saw even in the BBC. The BBC was filmed a few years after I left, and there were so many new things that were not in my time.
Right,
so I hear you. Kept,
so I remember in your story talking about the trauma of killing the chicken. Want to share that one? That was
I know. So look, the Kabbalah Center did not invent the atonement rituals where just before Yom Kippur, the holiest day, you go and you either kill a chicken or a fish or give money to charity so that your sins will be atoned. But this was, whatever happened, it was always taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
So it was a market in the middle of the night and we go there and there are dozens of chickens waiting in these crates. And then I was told to hold the chicken. And I used to, and I still do, love animals so much. So I'm holding this hand and I'm just patting it, so it would be calm. And I'm 7 years old. And then my father takes the chicken and he, circles the chicken 3 times over my head. And he says, this is your atonement. This chicken will go to death and you will go to life. And then they slaughter the chicken in front of my very young eyes. And then not only that, but they told me it's a big mitzvah to cover the blood with sand because there's something in the Bible about covering blood. So I'm seeing this chicken dripping blood and now I'm supposed to take some sand and cover the blood on the floor. And it was so horrendous. And then the next day, my mom would cook the chicken and she would say, no, that's not, those schnitzel did not come from that chicken, but we knew. So it was very difficult for me to eat those chickens and then to eat chickens in general. But you had to at the Kabbalah Center because Shabbos meals were always made of fish and then meat or chicken. And you had to have them because it was the mitzvah of celebrating Shabbat.
Sure.
So the first thing that I've done the minute I'm leaving the center was to become vegetarian. So I never got to taste cheeseburgers or
So
pork
interesting.
because I was either religious or vegetarian. It was the
Interesting.
first thing that I adopted leaving the cult.
Yep. So before we move on to your evolution and your self mastery, anything else you want to say about those early days about the Kabbalah Center, or if anyone thinks that Kabbalah Center is a good thing? Anything else you want to say to like warn them?
I say in the book, this is not the first spiritual organization that got corrupted by money and power. I really think they set up to do something good. They wanted to share the wisdom of Kabbalah with everyone, including women, which was a little bit feminist, but they turned evil. They became so powerful and they were not willing to let go of their power in whatever means possible. So that meant that people in the Kabbalah Center, in this cult, were controlled in a way that you wouldn't believe. So part of it was when I became a teenager was that Karen started marrying people. Now, can you think of a more controlling thing to do? She would say, Stephen, here is your soulmate, Rivka. You will marry her. And you just do because you believe Karen can see who your real soulmate is. And then you bring children into this crazy world and you can no longer leave because it's very, very difficult. You need to have the two soulmates and their children agree to leave the cult in which they've been their whole life. So it's very, very difficult. And it says there, when you read my introduction, that I escaped under the threat of arranged marriage, but it was not a threat. It was a dream for me. That was the big dream. I wanted to have the big wedding with the Rav and everyone dancing around me. And I thought, what can I do to become more spiritually deserving to become the Kabbalah Center bride?
Right.
And so we were praying and dancing and singing wedding songs all the time when I was in part of the commune. But it was, and there was someone, Karen said that she might get me to marry. But then I went to Paris. I had to join a community in Paris, and we were
As a
14
Hevra.
people. Yeah, 14 Hevra living in one small apartment.
Yep.
3 of us girls were in one bedroom. One was sleeping underneath the bed because there was not enough room. So we're not properly accommodated. And there were 2 newlyweds there with their babies. And the women, Stephen, they were so miserable. Again, I saw women sitting on the floor crying, reminding me of when I was 3.
Yeah.
And they were miserable. And then their husbands would yell at them saying, you're not spiritual enough. You've got to get over it. And I heard all of that because we're all in one tiny apartment. And I thought, is this really the dream? And so when I hurt my back and I was no longer able to be part of the money-making machine, I was sent back to Tel Aviv, and I knew that that was the end. I was no longer going to serve this cult that was all about making money and giving power to the Bergs.
Yeah. So you don't know this about my former cult, but he has the Guinness Book of Records for most mass weddings at one time. 35,000 couples, where he would say, you and you, you and you, and you had 5 minutes to decide if you accepted the Messiah's choice for you, and almost everybody did. And you were going to have sinless children because he would tell you who your perfect soulmate was. And with the Cabala Center, there would be people falling in love, and Karen would say, nope, you got to work harder. You need to make more money, or, and women are getting older. They want to have kids.
It was really part of her game. So I was dating someone when I was 16 in the Kabbalah Center, which was not really allowed, but we did it anyway. So we were both 16 and in love. And then he fell in love with someone else in the Hebrew who was 19. And somehow she fell in love with him, 3 years younger than her. But then Karen said, no. And then she told this girl, Sarah, to marry someone else. And my ex-boyfriend had to dance in their wedding. It was all so twisted. It really was. And so that was the way that they control people.
Yeah, they don't want you to have your own thoughts or feelings or choices. They want you to be obedient.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And let's not forget the red thread from the
Yeah.
evil eye for $26.
Well, it was free back in the days when we just joined the Kabbalah Center. You see the change? So it was free, and we used to go to the grave of Rachel, to Rachel's
Yes,
grave,
Rachel's
Rachel's
tomb.
tomb, in
It still is
Bethlehem.
free there, I think, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Like
It
the
is.
real Jews, not the
And
Kabbalah
then,
Center.
as you could see in the BBC, they were not able to access that anymore, but they still were saying that it came from there. I mean, nothing, the truth was never an obstacle
Right.
to sell things. And then later they realized they could sell it. It was just a red string. So imagine the return on investment. You buy a red yarn
Yes.
for $2 and then you sell it for $26 of this piece.
Yeah, and true
And it also
believers would.
became
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, it also became part of our identity. So you see people, even celebrities, with this red string, and you know they're part of the Kabbalah Center. It
Yeah.
became an identifier. And that was very important for people in the cult to know, I'm part of it. And that's what they wanted.
Yeah. Ashton Kutcher, didn't he
Yeah,
have
I saw him
one?
with a red string. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to switch now to how you found out who am I and where do I fit in the world, and this amazing, professional career that you've established. It's wonderful.
Thank you. So I'm going back to 18 and a half, nearly 19. I left the center. And as I mentioned, my biggest fear was that my life will be meaningless because they brainwash you that there
Exactly.
is nothing waiting for you outside the call. People outside the call live meaningless life. All they care about is eating, drinking, and having sex. And they're like animals. They have nothing spiritual in their lives. Like, how dare they?
Right.
But that's how we were brainwashed to
Yeah.
believe there is nothing outside the cult. We were feeling sorry for people outside the cult. So when you leave that organization, you become one of the people you were feeling sorry for. And that's very difficult to digest. So I leave the center. I'm not sure if I even want to leave because what kind of a life I'm going to have. And so I started contemplating on the big questions of who am I? Why am I here? What meaning is my life going to have? What are my values? So I mentioned becoming vegetarian, but that was because I decided that compassion is going to be a core value in my life. And I have compassion for people and animals, and that drives me still, this sense of compassion. So I went on and I used this notebook. It's falling apart a little bit. But that was the way that I was trying to figure out who I am. And so I wrote in a very tiny font in Hebrew all my thoughts. And, what do I believe in? What do I think about religion? What do I think about God? What do I think about the Kabbalah Center? And so who am I in a way that was really profound? And even though it was a very, very difficult journey, I'm not, sugarcoating it. I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to think for 6 months about what do I believe in and what do I want to become. And so at 19, I completely left the cult because when I just left, there were still thoughts of maybe I'll go back. And so I completely left it behind me. I became not religious at all. And it took me years to go back and reconnect to Judaism in a way that's meaningful to me.
Uh-huh.
So I find now the rich wisdom and beauty in Judaism that I block out because I said I wanted nothing to do with any of it.
Yeah, that's also typical. When people leave a Bible cult, they want nothing
Yeah.
to do with, the church until they
Yeah.
grow up, get some distance, and then realize, it's all not all or nothing, black and white. There
Exactly.
are healthy places too. And can I just ask, my recollection from your book was that your sister never joined the Hevra.
That's right.
And when you came out, you had somebody to talk to who accepted you. Were your parents still involved when you left the Hevra?
She saved my life. So she was never.
Your sister.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So she was never part of it in a way that her heart was not into it. So she would be dragged going to all these long weekends, the Shabbats we did together and the holidays, but she hated it. She really, truly hated it. Whereas I loved it. I loved the togetherness that we had in the cult.
Mm-hmm.
When I was writing the book and I was listening to a song we used to sing a lot called Leman Achai Ve'Re'ai, for my brothers and friends, I speak peace unto thee. And I listened to this and I was crying because there was part of me, as crazy as it may sound, there was part of me that missed that sense of togetherness that you don't get anywhere else. And I always say cults are not all bad. Otherwise, people wouldn't join them and stay in them. There is this sense of togetherness and cohesiveness that I don't have in any other aspect of my life.
Community. I felt the same way. Like your comrades, even though you're not really friends because you have to obey all the rules and turn them in if they break any of the rules.
But people were really snitching on each other.
Yeah, well, that's also part of the information control of the mind control thing. But there is a thing that is missed by people when they leave, this sense of being part of a bigger entity than yourself.
Exactly. So my sister was never part of it. And when she was 17, she told my parents, I'm out of it. I don't want to ever be part of this. And they denounced her. She was not allowed to go to my brother's bar mitzvah. She was not allowed to be part of the family. But when I left, somehow she was there. And the night that I tried to take my own life, she was there with me all night. That's how she remembers. And she reminded me of that. And so when I left, she was there. She really saved my life. She was able to give me hope that things are going to be good. My parents were still there, but they had like one foot out of the door. My mother sat with me when I left and she told me about all these unethical things that were happening in the center. She already knew and she saw, but she still stayed there for another year because living is hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
It becomes your life and you feel like you're living your own life. So it's very difficult.
Yep. So let's go into your expertise. I'm holding the book up again. Make it meaningful. How to find purpose in life and work. Please.
Okay. So as part of my deep meaning search, I decided to go to university and I studied philosophy so I could ask all the big questions.
Great.
And that was amazing. I had such a wonderful experience being a university student, going to all the classes and courses and learning new things. I absolutely loved it. But it was also very difficult because I had no money to my name. My parents did not support me. They thought it was a waste of time. So I saved a bit of money from the work I had prior to going to uni, but it was not enough. So I had a very small budget of about $20 a week, which was supposed to last me 7 days, which meant I often had to skip meals. And I was really starving myself to get through my first degree. And I did whatever I could survive, from cleaning people's toilets to typing people's assignments. And then I joined a project called Perach. It's a big project in Israel. It's beautiful. And you've got about 30,000 university students each year tutoring children from disadvantaged backgrounds, working with them for 4 hours a week. That does make a difference. So I had this boy who was 8 and he was beautiful. And I thought I was helping him, but he was really helping me because for the first time ever, I learned what it feels like to make a difference. In the Kabbalah Center, I never really made a difference. But this boy, I made a difference in his life. And I actually found him years later, and he still remembered me. And he's, became a successful director of an IT company with 2 kids. And that really felt amazing. So that was impact.
Yes.
And then I thought, oh, wow, that feels amazing. I want to do more of that. So I volunteered for another year, and then I became the vice manageress of the entire project in the age of 24. And that was a remarkable way to just feel like you're doing something meaningful.
Yeah.
So I thought, all right, after years of thinking I'll become a writer when I grow up, I thought, okay, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to become a manager of volunteers. So I went on to do a master's degree in management of not-for-profit organizations. And there I wrote a thesis. about women who volunteered in a rape crisis center. And the meaning and purpose they had was unforgettable. Unforgettable. And so I thought, wow, I'm good at that. I'm good at doing research. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a PhD. So the day I finished my master's degree, I enrolled into a PhD and I looked into volunteers again. And just focusing in my research in the pro-social behavior of humans was my way of saying, I've seen the worst in humanity. Now I want to see the best in humanity. I want to see people who give their time freely, not because they have to, not because they're manipulated to, but because they want to do good in the world. And I was going to look at volunteers and what motivates them and what makes them stay. And it was beautiful. And so I became a researcher of volunteering. And later I thought, I don't want to just look at the pro-social behavior of individuals, but also at companies. So what we call corporate social responsibility, corporate impact. And that became my life mission, to help business become a force for good in the world. Because when they do that, when businesses act with a higher purpose, they enable their employees and their stakeholders to have meaning in life and work.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a very meaningful way of establishing my life work, which is about creating a ripple effect of positive impact around me. Yeah. How do I enable others, individuals and company, to do good in the world? And I have hidden dividends of positive impacts, which I will never know about, but it makes me feel that my life is meaningful. It's not the empty life I was threatened with when I was in the cult, that I will just eat, drink, and be merry.
Right.
So that was my little revenge of showing that my life was as meaningful as it can get.
So you met a guy, fell in love, got married, had kids. My recollection of your journey, moved to Australia. He got a job, you got a job. So share a little bit more, because it was absolutely not an easy, smooth life. You really worked. And
yes, I had to work for everything.
Yeah.
So nothing was given to us. But we met when I was 22 and we fell in love, and we were really connected in our worldview as well. So we're both secular Jews, which meant that we have a lot in common, the way we see our life and the way we raise our kids. So we had two beautiful daughters, Emily and Michaela. And when Emily was 5, we moved to Australia. And that became my new home, which was also good for me to have some distance from all these memories and the places where they occurred. So that was part of the journey. And I got a job at Macquarie University where I was allowed to do the things that I love and believe in. So that was really fantastic. And so for years and years, I researched things like volunteering and corporate social responsibility. But what I found along the way are the ideas of purpose and meaning. So I mentioned, for example, the women who volunteered at the Rape Crisis Center, and they spoke about this sense of purpose. And what I found was that the thing that differentiated between those who left after 6 months and those who stayed for 10 years is that sense of purpose that was fully aligned with the purpose of the organization. And same with other studies that I've done. And my first study on corporate social responsibility was on employee volunteering. And I asked people, why do you volunteer through the workplace as opposed to doing it on your own? And the top answer was, because it makes life more meaningful to me. Not work, but it makes life more meaningful to me. And so I thought, wow, there is some kind of a spillover effect here, that when I volunteer through my workplace, everything becomes more meaningful. And so 25 years of research went into this. And as you mentioned in the book, I have some frameworks and tools to help people find some ways of living a more purposeful life. So I don't believe that you are born with a purpose, that it's something from God, that that you will have to find out or discover your purpose, but rather that you can start living a more purposeful life today. And I explain in the book how to do it. Again, I wish someone gave that to me when I was 19, but I figured it out by myself and lived that kind of life since leaving the cult.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, I listened to it and then I bought the book and I read it again. And I was thinking to myself, ex-members all should read this book. Like, it's inspirational, but it's also practical,
Yeah.
especially for folks who are still suffering. You know, they haven't done their homework about the cult. Maybe they still have family or friends in the cult and they're questioning whether they should go back, or, you know, is there Armageddon or is there a Satan?
Yeah.
But to do the work where you are knowing, and you were describing, realizing I have real impact on this young boy's life. I really have made a difference. And largely that's why I'm doing what I do, because of all my choices, I love helping people. And I love hearing from people who said, your book saved my life, or you helped me 40 years ago. And I don't even remember them
Wow.
until they remind me the story. But I just love helping people because it feels great to know that I'm making a difference.
It does feel great. And to be able to do that when you're right there at the point where you might be living in a cult or living religion and you're not sure what your life will look like, to have some kind of a roadmap on what you can do. So I'll go very quickly through the main idea in the book.
Please.
So in the book, we have a model, which is called the TIP model. And I'm happy to offer it to anyone who is contemplating on their life purpose, because it does help. It's very simple, but as simple as it is, it took me 3 years to develop it. And you saw an early version in my TED talk, but I kept working on it. So the TIP model is how to tie your talent and your passion to your impact. So by talent, I don't mean that you need to play the piano or do acrobatics. I mean that any skills, knowledge, capacity, capability that you have can be used towards your impact. The other part of it is passion. What do you care deeply about? So a lot of young people come to me and say, I don't know what my passion is. I don't know how to find my passion, which is a little bit funny because the word passion in Latin actually means suffering. So it's like, I don't know how to find my suffering. But they're looking for, they're looking for something that would enable them to live a more purposeful life. So I said, you know what, don't call it passion. Think about, what do you care about? Do you care about human rights, women rights, children? Do you care about animal cruelty? Do you care about climate change? There must be something that you care about. And then start thinking, how can I tie what I know, what I do, to what I care about to create a positive impact in the world? So one example is my friend Danielle, who is very good at teaching yoga, and she cares very much about refugees. So she opened a yoga studio for refugees where she offers this healing yoga for people who went through the tragedy of becoming a refugee. And there are tons of other examples, but it's about figuring out what you're good at. And that could be something you bring into your work or to your hobbies. And then what do you care about? And then how do you tie the two to create a positive impact? That's the TIP model in a nutshell.
Right. And you give just so, because you've lived it, it's so inspiring that it's like, of course, if she could do it, I can do it.
I did it, and so anyone can.
Yeah, you did it. So you're a professor now in a business school. You've done all these academic articles, which I am in awe of. I've done a few, but I'm a late bloomer in terms of being a scholar. What else should we say to people who may be listening to this about dealing with the current reality that we're all faced with such chaos and fear and uncertainty?
The world really looks like a very daunting place right now. I have to say, the last 2 weeks, oh my God.
Yes.
It does seem like we're going backwards sometimes instead of forward. But the only way to address it is by doing the personal work and nourishing personal connections. So for me, I can't solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't have the power to do that. But I do have the power to maintain friendships, meaningful friendships with my Muslim friends. I'm just writing a paper right now where we talk about an interfaith dialogue towards peace. And so we are using 5 different faiths and bring different ideas together. And I bring the idea of tikkun olam, repairing and healing the world from Judaism, which I think is a beautiful concept.
Yeah,
And I'm
I
working
believe in
with someone
tikkun
who's
olam.
Palestinian. And I tell you, it's not always easy, but it's the work that we've got to do. So don't think that if you're just one person, you can't do a lot. And I was giving a keynote address a couple of months ago in Queensland, and there was a group of 350 academic leaders. And I was sharing my story, and I was talking about purpose in higher education. And then I said, sometimes it feels very hard because we feel like, what can I do? I'm just one person. And so I asked the person sitting in the first row to say, what can I do? I'm just one person. And then the person next to her joined her, and they said it together. And then the entire first row, and then 350 people saying, what can I do? I'm just one person. And this echoed so profoundly. It was beautiful to see. So you're never too little to create a positive impact. And that would really impart meaning into your life and would also enable you to create that for others. And that is making it meaningful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I recently revisited Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and we're recording this, I think, the day after Auschwitz Memorial Day. And he survived Auschwitz and 3 other camps as a psychiatrist. And in rereading the book, he said that he had a visa. He could have left, but he wanted to be with his parents. So he chose to stay behind. And but he said, the Germans stripped everything from us, but they couldn't take away my ability to choose how I relate to myself.
And what kind of a person I want to be.
And what kind of person I want to be. Exactly. And for me, rereading that in this crazy time of Trump is really important because I'm blessed. I mean, I have a place to live. I have food. I have meaningful work. I have money in the bank, and I don't want to give in for despair. And who am I to despair when people are in Ukraine fighting for their survival, or people are starving to death, or being bombed, or people are in these camps where they're not getting basic human needs? It's like, you're blessed. Just do what you can, because you can do more than the average person. So that's why I do a podcast and I write journal articles and I'm doing research, and because I can.
In the book, I speak about the 7 enablers and 7 outcomes of living a more meaningful life. And you touched on 2 right now. So one is gratitude and the ability to say, I am blessed with this and this and this, and then turn this gratitude into impact. Because if I have all these privileges, how can I utilize them to do good in the world? And the other one is choice, because so many people say, well, I wish I could do it, but I don't have the time, I don't have the choice. And then Viktor Frankl had such an impact on me. I read him at 19 when I left the cult, and I read him when I wrote the book. And of course, reading it at 19 and reading it at 50 is quite different. And so the ability to understand, he wrote this in 9 days, which is unbelievable. But then when he spoke about this level of choice, I say to people, if you think you don't have choice, look at him. He was in Auschwitz. The Nazis took everything from him, from his clothes and shoes to his identity, profession, family, loved ones. Everything was taken from him. And yet he said, there is one thing they can't take away from me, and that's the choice of what kind of a person I want to be. And that is always a choice, always, even if it's a very difficult choice. And you have to give up almost everything to continue being kind and being a good person. but it is your choice, because without choice, we can't talk about meaning. If I'm forced to do everything, I'm not going to talk about why did I do it or what was the meaning of it. So
Right.
a
Right.
perceived choice is really, really important here.
Yeah. And the other thing he said is that you need to have hope. You have to have something to look forward to. And he talked about wanting to see his beloved wife, who unfortunately he didn't realize had already been murdered by the Nazis. But he also had his work, logotherapy, and he knew he wanted to write about this experience of dehumanization that the Nazis tried to do with him. And he lived to, I think, 92,
Yeah.
and he got 29 honorary PhDs.
Beat that, Stephen.
But seriously, this guy survived 4 concentration
Yes.
camps.
And it's not that the people who did not survive, none of them had hope, but he managed to use that hope and then portray it in such a beautiful way. And I talk in the book about optimism and hope against hope, and it's so important. And I'm teaching corporate social responsibility right now. I'm teaching it to my students, and I said, we've got to stay optimistic. It's very easy to become pessimistic against everything that's happening in the world right now. But optimism is a responsibility, because if you just become a pessimist, you just give up. Whereas optimism requires you the responsibility to do something about it. So I want to believe that the world can become better, and that all of us have the responsibility to make it so. There are some people in the world who are driven by the wrong motivations of power and money and would do anything to keep that way.
Yeah.
And we have to fight that in our little ways. We have to combat what is happening now in the US and in Gaza and in Ukraine and all the bad things that are happening. We've got to stand up for what is right, even when it's really difficult.
1,000%. And, for those of us who are parents, or grandparents, it's like we have an obligation to make the world as good as we can within our power to pass on to our children and be good role models for them.
Exactly. There is a beautiful saying that I often say, that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. It's our responsibility to leave a good world for them. And now, looking at all the issues around sustainability and environmental well-being, it's really important that we do the right thing today so they and their children can survive in the only planet that we have.
Yes, exactly. Well, I hope we get to meet in person someday and we can have dinner. I don't have a plan to come visit Australia at the moment, but I have a good friend and colleague in Melbourne who said, if you ever want to leave the US, you can come visit me and come work here. And so far, I'm staying in Massachusetts because I don't want to self-censor, and I don't want to send a message that I'm afraid, because that's what terrorists want.
Exactly right.
They want to control through fear.
Exactly right.
And
that's
I raise my middle finger to people who are doing that.
That's courage. We've got to have courage. Again, it's part of the enabler of having a meaningful life is courage. We've got to overcome. I mean, people who have courage, it's not that they don't have fears. They have to overcome their fears. And we're all afraid of different things happening around the world and in our more inner circles. But yes, we've got to overcome it and come together against those.
I'll tell you I'll tell you my secret, which is not a secret because I've said it publicly before, but what's been operating in my consciousness or my unconsciousness for 49 years is I nearly died in a van crash due to sleep exhaustion. That's what led to my deprogramming out of the cult, was because I fell asleep and drove into the back of a tractor trailer truck at 80 miles an hour. And it took them a long time to rescue me. They thought it would blow up. And the police and the emergency crew was like, you should be dead. You should be grateful that you are alive. And so I've always carried with me, I should have died, but I was given a chance to stay alive. And now what am I going to do with it? So when people say, aren't you afraid they're going to kill you? I'm like,
I already died once. I got a second life.
No, I've been on borrowed time.
Wow.
I never imagined I'd have decades of doing activism, but I've been speaking out against wealthy, powerful cults for almost 5 decades now, and I'm not about to stop.
Beautiful. I love that story.
So last words to you, Professor Haski-Leventhal.
I want to speak to those who might be contemplating leaving a cult or religion. And I know it's a very, very scary and difficult time. You might have to leave behind some family members. You might want to leave behind the values that you grew up, the certainty of how things work. But there is a life afterwards. There really is. And it's a beautiful, free life where you get to set up your own values and you get to set up your own pathways for what you believe in. And no one controls you anymore. And it's really is liberating. I started saying it was as liberating as jumping off an airplane without a parachute, but it really is liberating. And you might not see it at first, but you do have a lot of parachutes and you will be safe.
Yeah, and you're not alone. There are others who have, been pathfinders ahead.
Yeah.
So if you're in the Cabala Center wanting to leave, meet someone who has really made an amazing life.
And read Stephen's books and listen to his podcast. That will be good for you.
Bless you. But I want to hold this book up, Make It Meaningful, How to Find Purpose in Life and Work, from growing up in a cult to a life of personal meaning, Dr. Debbie Haski-Leventhal. And I read in this book about a book that you wrote and you got ripped off by some publisher, and it still pisses me off. And I think you should buy the rights back to the book and publish it under your name, because I'm an author and it was your book and it was a great idea and I want to see it. So anyway, that's another topic. So with that, I want to thank you and stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Be well.
Thank you, Stephen. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind. Only you should control it.